submission from Tate.
The combat sports world has just witnessed one of the most embarrassing reality checks in recent memory. Andrew Tate, a man who built his image around being a so-called elite legendary kickboxer, stepped into the ring against a clumsy YouTuber and was thoroughly exposed. What followed wasn't competition, it was humiliation. Tate was completely outclassed, offering no real resistance, no moments of control, and no evidence to support the myth he had spent years selling to his audience. This channel has already broken down why Andrew Tate's claimed fighting legacy doesn't hold up under scrutiny, and this fight confirmed it for everyone to see. The bout against Chase Damore didn't just end a narrative, it shattered it. The cracks were visible even before the opening bell. During the stare-down, Tate flinched at the slightest movement, reacting as if he'd been shocked. While his fan base rushed to spin the moment as elite reflexes, the truth was far less flattering. What we were really seeing was panic. In that instant, it became clear Tate had talked himself into a corner he could no longer escape. The pressure of maintaining the lie overwhelmed him, and his nervous system betrayed it. That anxiety didn't disappear when the fight began. It followed him straight into the ring, where the illusion finally collapsed. Tate versus Damore fight breakdown. Tate opened the fight by repeatedly jabbing the body while keeping his head completely stationary. Because of this, even a visibly awkward striker like Chase Damore had no trouble timing and countering him. It became clear almost immediately that Andrew Tate is nothing close to the world-class champion he claims to be. At best, he looked like an aging amateur who occasionally hits pads. True to form, Tate continued targeting the body, not because it was strategic, but because he had no idea how to reach the head of an opponent who was backing up with long, extended arms. A basic distance-closing sequence, such as a double jab followed by an overhand, was completely absent from his arsenal. Instead, he mindlessly worked the body, while Chase not only landed cleaner shots, but quickly realized he didn't even need to throw much in return. From the very first round, Tate posed virtually no threat. Recognizing this, Chase made a smart adjustment and began leaning into the clinch, draining Tate's energy with ease. You'd expect a supposed multi-time world champion to recognize what was happening, but that wasn't the case. Incredibly, Tate started initiating the clinch himself, diving into Damore's arms and making his opponent's job even easier. The way Tate willingly surrendered position and allowed himself to be exhausted is something you wouldn't expect even from a novice. It wasn't the mistake of an amateur, it was the mistake of someone with no real fight experience. Predictably, Andrew began to gas quickly. Ironically, that exhaustion briefly forced him to engage. Realizing that reality didn't match his fantasies, Tate finally attempted to target Chase's head instead of lazily tapping the body. Most of those shots missed, but they were just enough to momentarily slow Damore's momentum. However, once that short burst faded, Tate collapsed back into fatigue and once again searched for safety in the clinch. That's when Damore really took over. First, he began catching Tate with straight punches, then came the uppercuts, which visibly rocked him. When Tate froze under pressure, hooks followed. On multiple occasions, Tate avoided a knockdown only by clinging desperately in the clinch, pretending to wrestle his way out of danger. There were even moments where knockdowns went uncounted, an unusual choice by the referee. By the end of the fight, Tate's face told the full story: bruised, cut, and beaten. He lost virtually every meaningful exchange. Somehow, Andrew Tate managed to be thoroughly outclassed in what should have been the easiest matchup of his life. The most absurd moment came with the scorecards. One judge somehow scored the fight a draw. Thankfully, the other two awarded the win to Chase Damore, though even those scores were oddly generous. On paper, the fight may appear competitive. In reality, it wasn't even close. And that perfectly summarizes Andrew Tate's entire fighting narrative. Impressive on paper, completely exposed in reality.
Andrew Tate's alleged kickboxing career begins to fall apart the moment you examine it closely. In November 2008, Tate was ranked as the 7th best light heavyweight kickboxer in Britain by ISKA, the International Sport Kickboxing Association. On the surface, that sounds respectable, but this is where the inconsistencies begin. Finding a complete record of Andrew Tate's fights is surprisingly difficult. If we count only documented bouts, his record appears to be around 25 wins with an unclear number of losses. Even more concerning, many of his supposed title fights, arguably the most important bouts of any fighter's career, are either undocumented or completely absent from the public record. This is especially strange when you consider that we live in an era where even fights from the 1930s, such as Joe Louis versus James J. Braddock in 1937, are available for public viewing, some even restored in color. Yet somehow many of Tate's world title fights have simply vanished. While it's possible some records were lost, that explanation becomes less convincing the deeper you look. Let's examine the opponents Tate faced in these title fights. In 2009, Tate won his first major belt, capturing the ISKA English Cruiserweight title via fifth-round knockout. However, almost nothing is known about the opponent he defeated, Paul Randall, beyond his name. No notable resume, no verified achievements, and no accessible fight history. Tate's next title came shortly after, when he won the IKF British Cruiserweight title. This time, his opponent was Daniel Hughes. While Hughes does have a documented background, it's in boxing, not kickboxing. His boxing record stands at 12 wins and 3 losses, but there's no meaningful information about his experience or success in kickboxing specifically. In 2011, Tate attempted to capture a third belt, this time a vacant ISKA world title. That attempt failed when he lost to Jean-Luc Benoit, a fighter whose record varies wildly depending on the source. One database lists Benoit as having a 2-1 record, with 2 of those fights being against Tate. Another claims he has a 31-13 record. The truth likely lies somewhere in between, but the lack of consistency raises serious questions. A rematch was organized almost immediately, and Tate won by 8th-round knockout. After that victory, however, his momentum came to a halt. Andrew Tate would go on to lose 3 consecutive title fights. The first loss came by decision against Vincent Pettis, a fighter with an extremely unclear competitive history. One source lists Pettis at 2 wins and 2 losses, while another claims a staggering 60 wins and just 5 losses. The same source also lists Pettis as being 190 centimeters tall, identical to Tate, despite visual evidence clearly showing Pettis to be shorter. This makes the credibility of that data highly questionable. Tate's second title loss came in 2012 against Sahak Parparian, the first truly elite opponent of Tate's career. Parparian's credentials are undeniable: a record of approximately 50 wins and 14 losses, appearances in top-tier promotions, and victories over elite fighters. He even defeated Jason Willis in Glory, who would later become a champion there. Parparian himself fell short of a world title after losing to Alex Pereira, but the level of competition he faced was unquestionably world-class. This loss placed Tate's career in proper context. Later that same year, Tate suffered another title, this time against Franz Gray, a lower-level opponent compared to Parparian, who nevertheless knocked Tate out with a knee. In 2013, Tate adjusted his approach and secured a redemption win against Vincent Pettis, earning the ISKA World Full Contact Light Cruiserweight title. A year later, he defended or competed for another belt against Wendell Roche, an opponent with a reported record of 53 wins and 22 losses. However, Roche's victories are difficult to verify, while his losses are much easier to find. Tate often presents this win as a monumental achievement, emphasizing that he was the first fighter to knock Roche out. While technically true, the accomplishment loses impact when you consider that Roche already had nearly 20 losses at the time. This marked the end of Tate's title success. Shortly afterward, he lost the Infusion Live World Light Heavyweight title to Abraham Eustathiou. Despite this mixed and inconsistent resume, Tate consistently highlights his ISKA titles when discussing his kickboxing legacy. That raises an important question. What exactly is ISKA and how prestigious is it? ISKA, the International Sport Karate Association, later renamed the International Sport Kickboxing Association, is a governing body heavily influenced by point-based karate styles. The talent pool is significantly smaller than that of elite kickboxing promotions, such as K1 or Glory. Fighters from this system historically struggle when transitioning to MMA, including Tate himself, who suffered losses at the amateur MMA level. Only a handful of fighters from this background, including Raymond Daniels and Michael Venom, have found notable success, and even they struggled when facing elite competition. Daniels, for example, was repeatedly defeated in Glory, the highest-level kickboxing promotion of the modern era. The competition in Glory is so intense that even Israel Adesanya failed to win a championship belt there. Some argue that ISKA was more prestigious in the past, but history doesn't support that claim. From the early 1990s through the mid-2000s, K1 was the gold standard of kickboxing. Back then, being a K1 champion meant everything. Even fighters eliminated in the early rounds were still regarded as world-class. Take Melvin Manhoff as an example. He never won a K1 title, but simply reaching the semifinals cemented his legendary status. Another example is Peter Aerts, an ISKA belt holder in the 1990s, who was never a K1 champion and often exited tournaments early. To put it simply, ISKA is comparable to a regional MMA league, something along the lines of a minor league circuit. Not insignificant, but nowhere near elite. And rather than rely on opinion alone, the real question is, what do actual champions from kickboxing and MMA think about Andrew Tate's career?
When actual professional fighters and coaches talk about Andrew Tate, the picture looks very different from the legend he presents online. One of the most vocal critics was veteran striker Gabriel, who openly dismissed both Tate's resume and his advice to aspiring kickboxers. Gabriel criticized Tate for presenting himself as an authority on fighting fundamentals while spreading ideas that simply don't hold up in real competition. According to him, one of the most common misconceptions pushed by non-fighters is the belief that simply keeping your gloves high is enough to protect you. In reality, standing still with a tight guard is a recipe for disaster. Against a skilled opponent, punches will get through, damage will accumulate, and your hands themselves can be broken from repeated impact. Effective defense requires movement, head movement, footwork, angles, not just covering up and hoping for the best. While guarding has its place, relying on it alone shows a fundamental misunderstanding of high-level striking. Gabriel also pointed out that Tate often speaks as if he's discussing bare-knuckle street fighting, even though his career took place with gloves. In a gloved fight, many of Tate's claims simply don't apply. The idea that punching someone's guard will automatically injure the attacker is unrealistic in professional kickboxing. Perhaps more telling than Tate's opinions is the lack of available footage from his career. Despite claims of having dozens of professional fights, there is surprisingly little video evidence. Any fighter with 50 or more legitimate pro bouts, especially at a high level, would have extensive footage available online. Yet in Tate's case, fighting full fights is extremely difficult. One of the few accessible clips shows Tate competing in Enfusion, a legitimate European kickboxing promotion. In that fight, he was knocked out decisively. Based on this and his overall body of work, Gabriel concluded that while Tate is not a terrible fighter, he is far from elite. According to him, any competent kickboxer in promotions like Glory or One Championship would dominate Tate at his weight class. Now, to be fair, not all commentary about Andrew Tate has been negative. Israel Adesanya, a former Glory standout and UFC champion, has spoken publicly about Tate in a neutral to positive manner. However, even Adesanya admitted something crucial. He had never heard of Andrew Tate during his active kickboxing career. In an interview, Adesanya explained that Tate only began appearing on his radar recently, long after Tate had retired and become an internet personality. This is especially significant when you consider Adesanya's background. He has nearly 100 kickboxing bouts, competed internationally, and spent years immersed in the global kickboxing scene. While not every skilled fighter becomes a mainstream star, those who reach a high level are usually well known within the professional community. Even niche legends like Jean-Charles Skarbowski, a cult figure in Muay Thai and kickboxing, are widely recognized by serious practitioners, despite being unknown to casual fans. Skarbowski was so respected that he even helped Georges St. Pierre improve his striking. Yet Andrew Tate, despite claiming elite status, left little to no footprint in that same community. Supporters might argue that Tate improved after retirement, especially since he claims to have continued training and even returned for several fights after officially stepping away. That brings us to the next phase of this analysis. If Tate truly evolved as a fighter, we should be able to see it, both in his performances and in the level of his opponents. So let's examine those post-retirement bouts in chronological order and find out whether Andrew Tate's skills actually improved or if the gap between the myth and reality only grew wider.